Cycling has been a bit of a pastime for some people. You might go on a leisurely ride, you might enter a competition, you might do something for charity. Whereas cars are a little bit more simplistic. You go from A to B, maybe to your job, maybe down to the shops. You might even decide to take a little road trip now and again. But in 1908, two groups of men decided that they were going to travel through the centre of Australia using the power of pedals and using the power of an old 1907 Talbot car. So in today's video, I'm going to take a brief look, at these two feats of challenge. So get your pedals up and your engines running, because we're about to set off. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. From those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to another video, talking about some guys on some bikes and some men on some motors. So let's meet our main characters for The Motor Men. Henry Dutton was the son of a very wealthy pastoralist living in South Australia. He was one of only 500 registered people that owned a motorised vehicle. Considering that in 1907 manufacturing of automobiles was very new, it is no surprise that even in South Australia very few people had cars to drive in. Dutton's travelling companion was a gentleman by the name of Murray Aunger, who had been recommended by Dutton's father for his engineering background. And in fact, Aunger had been one of the first to build a motorised petrol vehicle in South Australia. On the 25th of November 1907, Dutton and Aunger made their first attempt from the city of Adelaide through the centre of Australia. Within 32 days, they managed to reach Tennant Creek, some 2,000 kilometres from this major city of South Australia. But from the very start, the motormen faced a number of problems. In fact, the first 100-kilometre stretch of the journey was faced with sandy soils that a 20-horsepower car couldn't get through. So a series of 30-foot coconut matting strips had to be placed down on the ground so that the motormen could cross this sandy soil of South Australia to get past that 100-kilometre stretch. And I'll let my future self work out the math and put it up here. Then, between a place called Horseshoe Bend and Alice Wells, about a 64-kilometre stretch, the car Angelina had to be pulled by 25 donkeys because it, again, couldn't traverse through the landscape of South Australia and into the Northern Territory. As the motormen traversed through the Northern Territory, they began to feel and experience the changes of climate into a more tropical feel. And being December 1907, the Northern Territory was in its wet season, the wettest part of its natural year, with torrent downpours of rain, a number of storms, creeks flooding and depositing a large amount of debris which made for obstacles of the motormen. There were termite mounds nearly all around them, and there was grass that in some cases were reaching 5 foot tall. And with these difficult weather conditions and obstacles in their way, by the time the motormen reached Barrow Creek, their gearbox was broken. And as I mentioned earlier, by the time they reached Tennant Creek, they had to abandon the car and abandon their expedition to Darwin. By the June of 1908, Dutton and Aunger had returned back to Adelaide, obtained a new car, which Aunger then modified, and they were about to set off on their second attempt through Central Australia. But hang on just one moment. Let me introduce the bikemen, who around the same time were just about to set off on their own expedition through the centre. Jim and Dick O'Neill, with their friend Fred Blakely, were three prospectors from the New South Wales township of White Cliffs. And later on in history, the O'Neill brothers would be one of the first pioneers within the Coober Pedy area searching for large fortunes of opals. But on the 6th of June 1908, the O'Neill brothers with their friend Fred Blakely would set off from White Cliffs and travel westwards towards the township of Farina and the start of their expedition through the centre of Australia. Now, the distance between New South Wales's White Cliffs and the township of Farina in South Australia was roughly 650 kilometres. They reached Farina, which was part of the Overland Telegraph Network, the big communications line that ran through the centre of Australia and out to the rest of the world. But also, as of 1883, Farina had a train station. Because they decided to then turn their attentions north, following the route of the Overland Telegraph Network, the only known route at that period of history, and followed it to a place called Blood Creek, which is on the border between South Australia and the Northern Territory. They arrived on the 7th of July 1908. It may have been difficult for the motormen to get through the South Australian landscape, but for the bikemen it was all that much more difficult. Through the sandy soils of the South Australian landscape, at times riding was completely impossible. And when occasions were better for riding capability, even then the wheels would become battered and dented, spokes would be broken and repaired with random bits of fencing along the way. And at times when materials and resources were low, tyres had to be inflated with piles of grass. The motormen left the city of Adelaide on the 29th of June 1908, and following the Overland Telegraph Network, they reached the township of Murray on the 4th of July. After another week, still following the network, they reached Oodnadatta, and then finally another 5 days passed and they reached township of Alice Springs, the centre of Australia. The motormen progressed better on this second attempt with the various mechanical changes that had been made by the Talbot factory and Henry Aunger himself. The 474 vehicle had larger tyres, had a much larger ground clearance of about 13 inches between the ground itself and the floor of the vehicle. And also Henry Aunger, in his own mechanical workshop, installed a new special low gear, which meant that with all these changes, there was no need for the donkeys to drag them through some of the sandy soils of South Australia, nor would they require as much of that coconut matting that they had to roll out the first time. After just 30 days on the road, the motormen soon skipped and hopped along to Tennant Creek, which is where the old vehicle, Angelina, had been abandoned. When the motormen came across their Angelina vehicle, they found that someone or something had tipped it onto its side. But it was still in one piece, and in fact the tyres were still partially inflated. So although there were significant repairs needing to be done, most notably a bent axle, the car was pretty much ready to go and carry on its journey through to Darwin. Meanwhile, the bikemen took yet another month to traverse between the border of South Australia, Blood Creek, and the position where they met the motormen at Tennant Creek. In early August of 1908, the two groups, the bikemen and the motormen, came together, found themselves in the same destination. And so, seeing that Angelina, the motormen's first vehicle, was in a bit of a state, the bikemen offered their assistance mechanically in the repairs of this vehicle. Now this perhaps may seem counterintuitive because you don't ask somebody who works in a bicycle shop to fix your petrol-powered vehicle. Well, in today's world, probably not, but in 1908, a lot of cyclists and a lot of bike specialists were in fact employed to maintain and manufacture the very earliest of motorised petrol vehicles. In fact, Henry Aunger himself was previously a cyclist and working on bike mechanics. And when the motormen eventually parted company with the bikemen, the motormen decided to leave their fellow expeditionary compatriots a little bottle of whiskey as thanks for their assistance in fixing Angelina the car. Following the repairs on Angelina, the motormen progressed further within another week, arriving at a place called Daly Waters on the 8th of August. Then further still to a place known as Pine Creek, some 100 kilometres south of the main city of Darwin. At Pine Creek, Harry Dutton decided to take the motor vehicle Angelina on a truck the rest of the way to Darwin, leaving Murray Aunger to traverse the rest of the Northern Territory landscape to Darwin, which he did so by the 20th of August 1908. Meanwhile, the bikemen would come in just 4 days after their motorised travelling companions, arriving at the city of Darwin on the 24th of August 1908. At the end of August 1908, great celebrations were had in the town hall of Darwin, celebrating the feats of these two groups of men. And here are some of the statistics as to the distances, the times taken travelling, and the speeds at which they traversed through the Australian landscape. What is more, the bikemen were accompanied by a dingo collie crossbreed, a 9-month-old dog that walked all 2,200 miles that the bikemen rode their bikes for. And it suffered, well, next to no injuries, no thorns or spikes in its paws, no scratches or lesions or anything of that sort. It was the first dog to cross through the centre of Australia. And there we have it, folks, feats of greatness by prospectors on pedals and some mechanics in some motors. Thank you for watching this video on the Bikemen, and please come back again for a brand new video. See you later.